We have breaking news on the peace plan between Israel and Hamas. President Trump moments ago saying that all of the hostages should be released here in the coming days, adding that once phase one is complete, the momentum to end the war will not stop.
There will be disarming, there will be pullbacks, there will be a lot of things that are happening. You know, I gave you a whole list of 22 different things that will take place. And I think it'll take place, and I think you're going to end up with peace in the Middle East. But we have to get our hostages back, and we weren't going to do it at the end, we're going to do it at the beginning.
Right now in Israel, the country's security cabinet is meeting to vote on the first phase of the deal. And if the plan passes and is then approved by the full Israeli cabinet later today, officials say the ceasefire will begin immediately. Hamas has said the hostages would then be released on Monday. Earlier, Gazans were seen celebrating in the streets, but just a short time later, smoke was rising after some new explosions there. The family of hostage Omri Miran, who was kidnapped 2 years and 2 days ago, telling CNN, "We know war is the kingdom of uncertainty." CNN chief international anchor Christian Amanpour is now with us to talk a little bit about what we are witnessing here. Christian, just put this into perspective, what this moment means.
Look, it's a really, really important moment, and Trump has achieved a ceasefire with, as you just heard him say, the momentum set to pursue to the final end game, which is a peace, a lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians. It has to be said that the elements to this peace are well known. It really just does depend on getting the full might of the United States in terms of its diplomatic and political leverage over Israel, and indeed with its Arab neighbors and Arab, allies in this event. They got all the important Arab states to come in and to help push Hamas towards agreeing. They got Turkey to come in as well and do it, and they have insisted. This is, when I say they, I mean Trump and the administration. That Netanyahu listens as well and does what he needs to do. So yes, it is a ceasefire now, and the next phases will be as they have laid out. I mean, look, the devil will be in the details. I know we say it all the time, but I've covered enough ceasefire and peace negotiations to know that this is not an overnight job. It will take a long time. It will take focus. It will take serious negotiations and real commitment. I just spoke to a load on my show just now of expert Middle East negotiators, a former Israeli Oslo negotiator, a conflict resolution negotiator, one of the negotiators who helped in previous U.S.-Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. And they all say one of, if not the main key, is for America to stay 100% involved and to be as honest broker as it can, and not just to be on one side. So this is a very important moment, and we know that according to this first phase, after the Israeli cabinet has agreed and Netanyahu and everybody signs off on it, then there will be apparently a 24-hour period until the actual ceasefire takes effect and the guns stop firing. And hopefully then they can start getting the hostages back within some 72 hours after that. And at the same time, or at some point, very, very soon, they have to surge in hundreds and hundreds of trucks of basic necessities, i.e. food and medicine, to a Gaza that's been under siege for half a year. And it's a terrible situation there. So the whole thing is on the road for the first time in a long, long, long time. And many people are excited, but also really worried and hopeful that nothing derails it, even at this early date.
Yeah, there's this element of kind of holding your breath, waiting for this to all happen. What does security look like moving forward, Christian? What is that going to look like for Palestinians?
Well, the basic demand under this agreement is that Israel, first and foremost, pulls back its armed forces, the IDF, from inside Gaza. That we remain to see. What lines? Will it be a total pullback? Will it not? What exactly? We know that Prime Minister Netanyahu and his extreme far right, frankly, most people in his government don't want to pull back. They don't want to pull back to a place where they feel they may not be safe and secure, and to a place that they may not be able to start the war again if they want to start the war again. And this has happened. So I'm not saying this, off the top of my head. For the Palestinians, according to this this plan. There is some, but the details are not quite clear. There's some talk of trying to assemble a peacekeeping force. Again, we don't know who and what would make up the component parts. We've heard that it could be an Arab force that comes in along with certain Palestinian factions in some form or fashion. We know that Hamas will have no right to be part of governance or any security force, but the disarmament of Hamas will take a long time. You know, the Northern Ireland peace proposal, the peace accord that was signed, the Good Friday Accords, I think it was 1998. It took another 10 years to negotiate the full, they called it decommissioning of the weapons. So the weapons were put out of use, but to end any armed factions, it took a long, long time. So this is not an overnight process, and it's going to take a long time. But unless there is an end to the occupation in the West Bank and, de facto in Gaza, there will not be peace. And that is the bottom line for what the Palestinians say, what many Israelis say, former negotiators for sure, and for what the rest of the world says. We've come to that place now in history after this terrible 2 years that began with the horrors of October 7th. We've come to that place where we know what the end picture looks like, and there can be no more messing around the edges and not doing what has to be done, which is the end of an occupation and to allow two states to exist in peace and security. And that was the point of this year's UNGA. President Trump went there, met with all the Arab states after they had had their conference with Macron and other European leaders, where they brought even more nations into the recognition, the official recognition of Palestinian statehood. This is all part of the building blocks to a future.
Yeah, really putting it into perspective. Christian, thank you so much for that. Christian Amanpour. Boris?
Thanks, Brianna.
For more on the situation in Gaza, let's turn to former U.S. Special Envoy for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, Frank Lowenstein. Frank, thank you so much for being with us. Do you have any doubt that Israel's Security Cabinet is going to approve this first phase agreement?
No, not really. They're only approving the initial stage. They're effectively just approving the release of the prisoners in return for the hostages, and that doesn't really touch any of the red lines of Bibi's extremist partners. But I do think that there's a long way to go before we can declare this a success, right? Even in this first stage. So there's much to celebrate. There's still a lot of things that can go wrong. And we had the situation in 2014. We negotiated a ceasefire that the Israelis and Hamas had both agreed to, but it wasn't clear where the withdrawal lines were exactly located. And it turned out there was a couple of Israeli soldiers that were on the wrong side of that. They were killed by Hamas. And the whole ceasefire blew up, before it had even gotten started. And in fact, the soldier's name was Hadar Golden. I believe his body is still being held by Hamas. So I hope that finally gets returned. But yeah, there's a lot of work to do just to make sure this first part goes smoothly. And then, of course, all the difficult issues were really left to phase two. So there's some very challenging negotiations ahead.
Given the fragility of this peace, I wonder what you make of a senior Hamas official telling CNN that Hamas still doesn't trust Israel, but they've received guarantees that were enough. What do you make of that, and why do you think Hamas is agreeing to this first phase?
Yeah, there had to have been some kind of guarantees, because otherwise they were just giving up the hostages in return for a promise from the Israelis. I don't think either side trusts the other at all, nor should they necessarily. So yeah, that had to be a part of that deal. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that any of the main issues were resolved. And I'm particularly thinking about disarming and the IDF withdrawal. President Trump just sort of said casually there will be disarming and withdrawals. There's a whole lot of details that need to be worked out there. And it really goes to the core of the disagreement that has prevented us from having a ceasefire thus far. So there's some really heavy lifting ahead for President Trump and his team. And as Christian said, they are really going to have to stay engaged at a very detailed level going forward, or this could fall apart at any point.
I do wonder, just stepping back, what Hamas's remaining capabilities are, if they are in a position where this international security force is going to see issues, is going to see some kind of tension with Hamas there if they don't relinquish their arms, if they don't give up control of the enclave.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they're going to have to, Hamas had to have accepted the International Stabilization Force, or I don't think we've gotten to the point where we are today, at least conceptually. And
Yeah.
really, their military capabilities have been severely degraded. They're operating, at 90% diminishment of their capacity. So hopefully they'll take this opportunity to step back, let the International Stabilization Force come in, restore order, and sort of allow people to begin this long and arduous process of reconstruction. But I don't think there's any way the International Stabilization Force will even go in there if there's any questions that Hamas will be fighting them. So I'm assuming that piece of it at least has been sorted out.
Frank Lowenstein, we have to leave the conversation there. Always appreciate you sharing your point of view.